The National News Desk, locally covered, nationally connected.
Today, after 2 years of suffering, hunger, and humiliation, we feel reborn.
Highly optimistic and extremely cautious. The first phase for peace in the Middle East now underway, where U.S. troops are now stepping in for support.
The defendant was arrested yesterday on a federal criminal complaint near his Florida residence.
The 29-year-old Uber driver now accused of igniting the deadly Palisades fire. How ChatGPT helped police piece together a possible motive. And James Comey pleads not guilty. The trial date for the former FBI director now set. From the nation's capital, this is the National News Desk, America's News Now. Thank you for being here with us. I'm Dee Gatton, and after more than 2 years in captivity, Hamas is set to release the remaining Israeli hostages as the terror group agrees to phase 1 of a historic peace deal with Israel. We bring you team coverage. Matt Gelka breaks down the details of the peace agreement and what happens next. But first, after 733 days in captivity, the hostages held by Hamas are closer than they've ever been to coming home. Kaylee Gaskin speaks with those directly impacted by the 2-year standoff and why some thought this day might never come.
They've been held in reportedly unimaginable conditions for more than 2 years, in underground tunnels, starved to within an inch of their life, physically abused and tortured.
It's really hard to believe that this moment is coming.
Now, as part of the peace deal between Israel and Hamas orchestrated by the White House, the remaining hostages are set to finally be released.
Getting them is a complicated process. I'd rather not tell you what they have to do to get them. There are places you don't want to be. Very importantly, the hostages are coming back.
Celebrations erupting in Israel's hostage square. 48 individuals taken by Hamas on October 7th remain in Gaza. Only 20 of those are believed to still be alive.
To those parents, the dead young man is just as important as though this person were alive.
We spoke with Avahai Braddock. His wife and 3 children were kidnapped on October 7th from their kibbutz. All of them survived and were in the first wave of hostages released after 51 days in Gaza.
They were starved. They all lost a lot of weight. They just looked terrible.
But his kibbutz is still waiting on the release of 2 hostages, Gali and Ziv Berman, twin brothers in their mid-20s, believed to still be alive.
This is a tremendous joy for our kibbutz. Now everybody's celebrating, but deep inside, we're still just waiting to see them and to get them back.
Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Michael Leiter warning there's still obstacles to getting all of the hostages out of Gaza.
They're not the only ones holding the hostages, both the living and the dead. There are 4 organizations, terror organizations alongside of Hamas. So they have to be identified, they have to be found, and they have to be returned. But we're hoping that's all going to be able to be done in those 72 hours.
President Trump says he's planning a trip to the Middle East in the coming days, and he expects all of the hostages to be released early next week, either Monday or Tuesday. In Washington, I'm Kaylee Gaskins, reporting for the National News Desk, America's News Now.
And we continue our team coverage with Matt Gelka on the historic deal brokered by the White House as the U.S. promises to send nearly 200 soldiers to Israel to support the ceasefire.
Israel and Hamas signed on to phase 1 of a U.S.-led peace deal Thursday. It starts with a ceasefire and hostage release. At the White House, the president celebrated the agreement during a cabinet meeting.
Something that people said was never going to be done. We ended the war in Gaza and really, on a much bigger basis, created peace. And I think it's going to be a lasting peace, hopefully an everlasting peace. Peace in the Middle East.
A full ceasefire in Gaza is set to go into effect within 24 hours of Israel formally ratifying it. That includes a partial withdrawal of Israeli forces and then a 72-hour countdown for Hamas to release hostages. There's believed to be about 20 remaining living hostages and the remains of 25 others.
We are getting the hostages back on Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday, and that'll be a day of joy. I'm going to try and make a trip over.
The deal represents a breakthrough in a 2-year war that started with the deadliest massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust. Gaza's health ministry has said nearly 70,000 Palestinians have since died, with the country in a humanitarian crisis. There were celebrations in Israel and Gaza when reports of a deal first emerged. The concern with any agreement is whether or not it holds. The hostage release is only described as phase one. The peace deal proposed by the Trump administration is a 20-point plan that includes rebuilding Gaza without Hamas. The timeline of how future phases would play out is still unclear.
There will be disarming, there will be pullbacks, there will be a lot of things that are happening. You know, I gave you a whole list of 22 different things that will take place. And I think it'll take place, and I think you're going to end up with peace in the Middle East. But we have to get our hostages back. And we weren't going to do it at the end, we're going to do it at the beginning.
President Trump says he's been asked to address the Knesset, Israel's parliament, and that speech could take place as early as this weekend. Reporting in Washington, I'm Matt Gelka for the National News Desk, America's News Now.
To Washington, D.C., where President Trump has been going off script during the shutdown, and it's making things a bit harder for Republicans as they try to hold the line on a clean, continuing resolution. One example is Trump saying he'd like to see a solution on health care subsidies and that he is negotiating with Democrats, which GOP lawmakers deny. Another instance is over whether federal workers will receive back pay once the shutdown ends.
But for the most part, we're going to take care of our people. There are some people that really don't deserve to be taken care of, and we'll take care of them in a different way.
These federal workers, it's my understanding that the law is that they would be paid. There is some other legal analysis that's floating around. I have yet had time to dig into and read that.
The White House following through with threats to lay off a substantial number of federal workers on Friday. Republican lawmakers maintain one hang-up in the Democrats' demands for extending health care subsidies involves aid to illegal immigrants. Democrats say that's not the case.
He literally wants to reimburse hospitals more money for treating illegal aliens than American citizens. Fact, go look it up.
Federal law clearly prohibits the expenditure of taxpayer dollars to provide health care to undocumented immigrants, period, full stop. And no Democrat on Capitol Hill is trying to change that law.
Meanwhile, health insurance premiums are expected to double without the extensions Democrats are seeking. A classified legal opinion from the Trump administration justifies lethal strikes against a list of cartels and suspected drug traffickers. CNN reports it was produced by the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel. The opinion argues cartels pose an imminent threat to Americans. It follows a series of recent deadly strikes in the Caribbean against alleged drug smuggling vessels from Venezuela. Attorney General Pambani declined to comment on the legality of these strikes when pressed earlier this week.
Senator Coons, I'm not going to discuss any legal advice that my department may or may not have given or issued at the direction of the president on this matter.
Sources tell CNN the list of cartels in the opinion covers more than those the administration has publicly designated as terrorist organizations. In a letter to Congress last week, the War Department said President Trump determined the U.S. is in an armed conflict with the cartels. Former FBI Director James Comey is set to go on trial January 5th after pleading not guilty to lying to Congress 5 years ago. The vocal critic of President Trump faces one count of making a false statement and one count of obstruction of a congressional proceeding. It's in connection with his testimony before a Senate committee in September 2020. Trump has been pushing for a case against Comey, who played a key role in the 2016 Russian collusion probe. And new developments, an arrest made Wednesday in connection to the most destructive fire in Los Angeles history, the Palisades fire back in early January. Authorities say 29-year-old Jonathan Rinderknecht is suspected of maliciously setting the initial fire on New Year's Eve 2024 and even calling 911 to report it. The Palisades fire largely destroyed the Pacific Palisades and parts of Malibu, burned more than 6,800 homes and businesses, and killed 12 people.
Geolocation data for the 911 calls showed that he was standing above the fire in a clearing merely 30 feet from the blaze as it rapidly grew. Though homes and businesses cannot be rebuilt, this arrest, we hope, will provide a measure of justice to all those who were impacted.
According to the acting U.S. Attorney for Central California, ChatGPT evidence helped investigators identify the suspect. Investigators say they obtained digital devices belonging to Rinderknecht that contained AI images he generated depicting burning a city and people fleeing. An update, the final escapee from a New Orleans jailbreak 5 months ago has been caught. Derek Groves, seen right there, was taken into custody Wednesday in Atlanta, Georgia. He was found hiding in a crawl space in a house, appearing to be the only one in the home. Groves was among 10 inmates who escaped through a hole behind a toilet in the jail in May. All 9 others were taken into custody within 6 weeks of the breakout. Groves was waiting on sentencing for a murder conviction when he escaped in the spring. Coming up next, former U.S. Attorney John Fishwick discusses the legality of the White House troop deployments, the court battles he says Trump will most likely win, and the Supreme Court back in session, the case now under review that could have an impact on future elections. The Trump administration in the midst of several ongoing legal battles as the president deploys National Guard troops to more cities nationwide. Earlier this week, I spoke with former U.S. Attorney John Fishwick to discuss. There is a clash between federal and state authority, which we have discussed, John. But what is your assessment of the current situation? Do you see anything unlawful?
So, Dee Dee, we've got another separation of powers showdown. The Trump team says, look, when he calls up the National Guard, it's within his discretion as president. He thinks there's a rebellion. He thinks he needs to protect the ICE agents and federal property. The state authorities say, hey, look, we've got this under control. Crime is going down. We don't need you. Ultimately, I think the Trump team is going to prevail in these arguments. I think the Supreme Court is going to find that the president makes these calls, not a court, not a judge. The president decides if he needs to call the National Guard. It's basically within his discretion. He's our commander-in-chief. He's in charge of keeping the country safe, not a particular judge in a particular locality. So eventually, Trump is going to prevail in this dispute. There's going to be a lot of skirmishes with a lot of different judges, but ultimately, the highest court in the land is going to rule in his favor.
And this is concerning, bringing in the National Guard. But when you assess the presence already there, I want to play for you a clip from Chicago's police superintendent today. He was speaking of his officers' response in light of the federal immigration crackdown. Listen.
Sometimes there's a struggle when you're walking that line to make sure that you're not violating either one of those things, and at the same time enforcing the law the way that we're supposed to. One thing about law enforcement, I'll tell you this right now, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. But we accept that.
So when you have violent scenes like we did over the weekend in Chicago, can you clarify the role of an officer, a police officer versus a federal agent, and if there are any exceptions to the Illinois Trust Act, which came up today?
Yeah, so, Dee Dee, the Illinois Trust Act basically says that local law enforcement are not supposed to help ICE agents if they're doing a civil procedure, in other words, a civil detention order for a particular illegal immigrant in Chicago. But if there's a crime being committed, if ICE agents are under siege by citizens in that community, absolutely law enforcement needs to go to their aid. Local and state law enforcement needs to go to their aid. Law enforcement needs to cooperate. That's a great thing in this country when it happens all over our country. But if there's a crime committed, law enforcement needs to go to the ICE agent's aid. If they're serving a civil warrant, they don't go to assist them with that.
Only got about 30 seconds. There's been a lot of reaction pouring in over the sentence for Justice Kavanaugh's would-be assassin. Do you believe that 8-year prison sentence was insufficient, as Attorney General Pam Bondi put it?
Yeah, Justice Kavanaugh, is on the United States Supreme Court. Whenever you threaten to kill a justice, that's a very, very serious crime. I think, like most folks, I think he should have gotten a much heavier sentence. DOJ is going to appeal, but that's a challenge. We give a lot of discretion to judges in the sentencing. They're going to appeal. He obviously got a sentence that was way low, but will it increase on appeal? I think it's going to be a challenge for DOJ to overturn that, but there's a lot of frustration out there with that, what is perceived as a very light sentence.
All right, former U.S. Attorney John Fishwick, as always, thank you for joining us tonight on the National News Desk.
Thank you.
Most Americans oppose the militarization of law enforcement in American cities. This according to a new Reuters Ipsos poll, which says almost 60% of people believe the president should send armed troops only to face external threats. An overwhelming majority also say the military should remain apolitical. These numbers suggest unease as Americans react to the increasing number of National Guard deployments by the White House. The Supreme Court has indicated it will revive an Illinois Republican congressman's lawsuit over absentee ballots. In 2022, Mike Bose sued over a state law that allows mail ballots to be counted after Election Day. A federal appeals court tossed the lawsuit, saying Bose didn't have standing to sue. Bose had argued candidates should have a default standing to sue over election laws. Some justices also questioning whether he actually suffered an injury from the rule.
Generally, we have said that suits should be brought by people for whom the harm is concrete in some meaningful way.
In every election, candidates voluntarily put themselves up for election, and there's a risk that they will win or lose, right?
The case could have sweeping implications for election litigation, potentially opening federal courts to challenge a wide range of voting rules. The Supreme Court seems likely to side in favor of allowing conversion therapy for children. On Tuesday, the justices heard the case of a Christian counselor challenging a Colorado ban on the practice. The counselor argues a ban violates her First Amendment rights from offering voluntary faith-based therapy. Colorado says it's a scientifically discredited practice connected to serious harm. A decision is expected by June. A 2026 cost of living adjustment announcement for Social Security is expected this month, though the government shutdown could affect the timing of all of this. Experts project an increase of 2.7 to 2.8%. That's based on the latest government inflation data. Millions of Social Security beneficiaries will get a boost on their monthly checks in 2026. And in Michigan, Governor Gretchen Whitmer just signed a bill that will eliminate tax on Social Security tips and overtime. There is growing fallout tonight over the case of a former Des Moines school superintendent who is now facing federal charges. And it's raising serious questions about how school districts vet their top leaders. Let's go to Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team. So didn't they do a background check on the superintendent of schools?
Yeah, 2 different school districts actually did a background check. They said that he passed FBI background checks and employment eligibility verification, one in Iowa, one in Pennsylvania. But after his recent detention by federal immigration agents, part of his background, including his citizenship status and educational credentials, actually turned out to be false.
So there are already calls to revamp hiring. What kind of additional steps are we talking that may be taken?
So Senator Chuck Grassley out of Iowa, he's pushing for a broader use of the federal E-Verify system, basically a stronger identity check for new hires. So the question now is whether the scandal is going to force schools nationwide to rethink how they confirm who's actually walking into these leadership roles. So it'll be interesting to see if there's change on a nationwide level.
Right. Emma, thank you. A little later on, Emma's going to join us to break down a potential solution to these types of oversights in America's education system. Coming up, the oldest casino in Las Vegas is embracing the future with an all-virtual gaming floor. And new rules for helicopters as 3 major airports work to make the airspace safer. We're back in 90 seconds. The National News Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we start in Washington, D.C., where airports have new flying rules.
The FAA recently announced it is making some rule changes near Reagan National Airport permanent regarding where helicopters can and cannot fly, and it tweaked a few rules too. Also, it changed helicopter rules at BWI Marshall and Dulles. At BWI Marshall, the FAA moved a route for helicopters near I-95 to the northwest side of the interstate. The reason is to keep helicopters further away from planes taking off and landing at BWI. Meanwhile, at Dulles, the FAA says helicopters using a route that takes them over several runways now have to fly higher.
They really want to tighten up the rules and regulations and make sure that everybody knows their lanes, knows their routes, and keep what happened from January from ever happening again.
You know, Steve, we're pretty excited.
Golden Gate owner Derek Stevens is all in with the latest high-tech gaming at the oldest casino in Las Vegas. Think of it as rolling the digital dice. And so far,
it's about double what our projections were, so we feel pretty happy about it.
Stevens says the move toward electronic gaming isn't new. It's just been under the radar. Stevens says all electronic gaming at Golden Gate is part of an overall update tied to a marketing campaign called The Night Starts Here, to attract more tourists and locals.
We do miss the old, but we kind of welcome the new.
Making it a little bit more modern has definitely opened up for the younger generation.
Amongst the peppers and cabbages, kids are having fun while learning new skills. Since 2009, the Highland Youth Garden has created a positive impact.
We cultivate smiles, not only from the community, but from the kids that come here.
Paul Kemmer oversees the garden and gets to experience the joy of teaching the next generation. Since May, about 11,000 pounds of produce have been given out for free.
Coming up next here on the Nashville News Desk, a charity auction for public broadcasting. The painter's legacy now being used to save his signature platform. And inhalers are a life-saving treatment for millions, but a new warning of an environmental threat and the growing concerns over carbon emissions. That's coming up next. Taking a look at the top trending stories on our website right now. A new study suggests respiratory medication inhalers contribute to climate pollution Due to the propellants used in the apparatus, researchers say the impact of pollution from inhalers was equivalent to driving more than 500,000 cars per year. Attending a wedding, it can cost just as much as your rent payment, according to a new study. When factoring all of the pre-wedding festivities, researchers estimate one person can spend as much as $2,000. And also, country music icon Dolly Parton says she's okay and she is not dying. Parton posted a video to social media and cleared up the recent rumors about her health earlier this week. Those stories and much more available right now at thenationaldesk.com. California is the first state to legally define ultra-processed food. That's after Governor Gavin Newsom signed the Real Food Healthy Kids Act. It defines ultra-processed food as food that may contain high amounts of saturated fat, sodium, added sugar, and certain additives. The law requires health officials to determine the ultra-processed food most harmful to human health, and that food will be banned from schools. The Trump administration wants to slash NASA's overall funding by nearly a quarter, including funds for NASA's science by almost half. Scientists and advocates, including Bill Nye, the science guy, are on Capitol Hill urging lawmakers to preserve NASA's funding.
Cuts to NASA science will not make the U.S. stronger. Investing in it will. Let's keep the United States the world leader in space for all of us and for generations to come.
Nye, the CEO of the Planetary Society and NASA scientists, argues it's a national security issue. NASA says it pumps about $75 billion annually into the U.S. economy. The Trump administration has not commented on its proposal. 30 paintings from painter Bob Ross will be auctioned off to raise money for public television stations, with the first starting next month. The president of Bob Ross Incorporated says it ensures his legacy continues to support the medium that put him into U.S. homes. The estimated total value reaches up to $1.4 million. In July, Trump signed a bill canceling over $1 billion for public broadcasting. Still to come, the Pentagon moving forward with its restrictions on the press. Why critics say the move may stifle reporters and violate the Constitution. You're watching the National News Desk, America's News. Now, you can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back. The National News Desk, locally covered, nationally connected.
This shutdown is nothing more than political cover for Chuck Schumer and the Democrats.
Millions of Americans are about to see their health care costs double, triple, or quadruple.
Nearly 2 weeks in and no end in sight. From airport runways to military bases, the precious paychecks now in limbo for families coast to coast.
Chicago is not lawful what they're doing. They have to be very careful.
This is not the type of America that my ancestors, our ancestors, fought hard to create.
Windy City whiplash, from ice-free zones to growing protests. The latest court ruling now throwing a wrench in the president's plans. And later, nearly half of fatal car crashes tied to the use of a popular drug, the grim link revealed in a new study. From the nation's capital, this is the National News Desk, America's News. Now, thank you for being here. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and American air travel continues to be caught In the chaos of the government shutdown, mass delays at airports continue as the shortage of air traffic controllers is exacerbated by a wave of sick calls. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar has the latest from Washington as the shutdown is headed for a third week.
As the government shutdown stretches on, so does a domino effect of flight delays. Just between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. Friday, nearly 650 flights across the country were delayed, according to FlightAware's misery map, Chicago's O'Hare experiencing the most.
The average was 5% of delays in the national system was from controller staffing shortages in the past. Okay. At this time, it's 53%. I mean, I think what's happening here, 90% of the controllers, they show up, they come to work, but 10% of them are lashing out.
There's no concrete evidence to tie these sick calls to air traffic controllers reacting to the shutdown. But the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, a union representing more than 20,000 staff, says it does not condone coordinated activity that impacts the national airspace system. In a statement to its members, they say, "We must also recognize that in the current political climate, federal employees are under heightened scrutiny. We cannot stress enough that it is essential to avoid any actions that could reflect poorly on you, our union, or our professions."
We need the best and the brightest, the dedicated controllers, and if we have some on our staff that aren't dedicated, like we need, we're going to let them go.
Air traffic controllers receive 13 accumulated sick days per year. Federal workers may be required to have a doctor's note for any sick leave longer than 3 days. In response to the Transportation Secretary's comment, the union tells us there are processes and procedures in place to deal with the inappropriate use of sick leave. So far, the delays haven't put enough political pressure on congressional leaders to push them to a compromise on ending the shutdown. A Harvard Caps Harris poll taken the first couple days of the shutdown found a slim majority blame Republicans more than Democrats for the shutdown. But 65% said Democrats should end the shutdown without securing the health care subsidies they're demanding Republicans sign on to. As the shutdown heads into its third week, the Trump administration is stepping up its messaging around these mass delays. At airport security lines across the country, passengers will soon see monitors playing a video of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem blaming Democrats for the shutdown and its impacts on air travel. At the White House, I'm Atra El-Nashar for the National News Desk, America's News Now.
The White House Budget Office says it has started firing federal workers amid this government shutdown. White House Budget Director Russell Vought posting on social media that rifts have begun, referring to federal reductions in workforce. He did not say how many workers would be impacted, but a spokesperson for the Budget Office described the reductions as substantial. The government shutdown is getting in the way of a possible farmer bailout. Politico reports the White House is delaying any move on help for farmers who have seen their profits plummet after President Trump's tariffs resulted in China cutting off U.S. soybean imports. Politico adds that the Office of Management and Budget set aside nearly $13 billion from an internal account. Any plans to use tariff revenue would require congressional approval. New development. Senate Republicans say the FBI crossed a line during Special Counsel Jack Smith's January 6 investigation in 2023. They claim the Bureau, under the Biden administration, used court orders to secretly obtain the phone records of 9 GOP lawmakers. FBI Director Kash Patel, in a social media post, said this is proof that phone records were accessed for what he described as political purposes. Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley says his committee will investigate. Military officials are pushing forward with new restrictions on the press, and members of the media are pushing back. In a statement released Wednesday, the Pentagon Press Association calling out new policies that, quote, appear designed to stifle a free press and to further isolate reporters. Last month, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth's press office outlined new rules that would sharply restrict reporting and threaten the credentials of any journalist who reports information that hasn't been authorized for release. 6 former U.S. Surgeons General accused the health secretary of endangering the health of the nation. In a Washington Post op-ed, the former officials say Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has promoted discredited claims on vaccines and misinformation. They suggest a new secretary is needed to restore trust in public health agencies. HHS hit back, saying the doctors are the same officials who presided over the decline in America's public health. And a federal judge has temporarily blocked National Guard deployment in Chicago for 2 weeks, saying the move violates the U.S. Constitution. This as President Trump's immigration crackdown remains in the spotlight both on American streets and in courtrooms. National correspondent Christine Frizzell reports from Washington.
The arrests have carried on across the country, on the streets and at job sites. A strategy resulting in both protest and praise. A New York Times Siena poll finding that while a majority of Americans support deporting immigrants living in the United States illegally, a majority also say Donald Trump's actions on immigration enforcement have gone too far. Protests capturing the anger and frustration of the methods, especially most recently with the use of the National Guard being sent into cities like Chicago. Leaders there have called it unlawful and unnecessary.
Armed, masked men showing up with Black Hawk helicopters, sticking guns in the faces of Black women, zip-tying Black children, putting immigrants in one van, putting Black folks in another van. This is not what builds safety.
The Trump administration, though, celebrates what it refers to as hunting down and finding the worst of the worst. Over the last 9 months, sharing photos of some of their arrests. Among them, gang members, child sex offenders, and convicted murderers who had been released into the United States.
If we have to do it the hard way in Portland and Chicago, we will.
The White House appearing undeterred by legal challenges, pushing ahead with plans to leave National Guard troops in cities where leaders have told them they're not welcome.
We're purchasing more buildings in Chicago to operate out of. We're going to not back off. In fact, we're doubling down, and we're going to be in more parts of Chicago in response to the people there.
Legal arguments over sending in the National Guard played out in both Illinois and Oregon over the president's power to do this. The attorney for the state of Oregon called the president's assessment of the situation in Portland, quote, untethered from reality. An attorney for the federal government called the protesters violent people, said there's a risk of far more violence if they let their guard down. I'm Christine Frizzell for the National News Desk.
As California Governor Gavin Newsom and Democrats look to create a path for redistricting the Golden State, according to a new poll by the firm Coefficient, a majority of California voters are on board with a ballot initiative removing redistricting authority from an independent commission. Just 36% of Californians oppose the initiative. Democrats say it's a counterstrike against Republican efforts to gerrymander Texas.
We're in an unprecedented moment, and we need to respond, therefore, in an unprecedented way and fight fire with fire. To me, this is about having an equal playing field and making sure we're at least all playing by the same rules.
Democrats' attempts to retake the House could hinge on the initiative, especially as Texas and other Republican states explore redistricting to add red seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. There's been heavy digital and TV ads in California supporting and opposing the initiative. Dominion Voting Systems, which was targeted by false 2020 election claims, was sold to a St. Louis-based company run by a former GOP election official. Liberty Vote says it bought Dominion for an undisclosed amount. The company says it will do a review of Dominion's equipment ahead of next year's midterm elections and noted an initiative focusing on paper ballots. A Pennsylvania school district is now exploring legal action after learning its former superintendent, Ian Roberts, may have lied about his criminal background and even his citizenship. Let's go to Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team. So both school districts, it's my understanding, they both say that they followed the rules, but they still ended up with a superintendent under federal investigation.
Yeah, both schools maintain that they did everything right, everything by the book, but Ian Roberts' case is exposing obviously some major weaknesses in the hiring system. Now, it sparked a broader political push actually to tighten those verification processes nationwide, and that's where Senator Chuck Grassley and several of his Republican colleagues come in.
Yeah, so the senator has been calling for changes to the E-Verify system, the school system. Tell us about that proposal.
So he is leading the charge on a bill that's called the Accountability Through Electronic Verification Act. So the legislation would permanently authorize and expand E-Verify, which is the federal program that helps employers confirm if a worker is allowed to legally work in the U.S. And sponsors of the bill say that E-Verify is going to also help protect jobs and get serious about enforcing immigration laws. So protecting jobs for Americans is is who they're referring to.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, what this could mean for schools nationwide. We'll see. Emma, thank you.
Thanks.
For more on this Fact Check Team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code or visit thenationaldesk.com. Still to come, our team of correspondents breaks down this week in Washington, from the Trump administration's crackdown on illegal immigration to the peace deal between Israel and Hamas.
And welcome back to the National News Desk. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day, and our team of correspondents reports on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. A majority of voters support the deportation of illegal immigrants, but they also think President Trump's actions on immigration enforcement have gone too far, according to a New York Times poll released this past week. National correspondent Christine Frizzau, this poll comes amid a growing controversy about the deployment of National Guard troops in cities where ICE is cracking down on illegal immigration.
Yeah, bird's eye view, Steve, here is the majority of the country really wanted a lot to be done about illegal immigration, which by all measures, in certainly the minds of many voters, had gotten out of control under President Biden. What's different, though, is the way this immigration crackdown under the Trump administration is being carried out. So, on one hand, you see this brilliant social media campaign by Immigration and Customs Enforcement every single day, it seems, posting pictures of what they call the worst of the worst. And, it's hard to argue that it's a bad thing that they're arresting people who have, murder charges, that have been convicted murderers, child sex predators, all these people that they say they're going after. And they are. But they're also arresting quite a few other people. And they're starting to do it at people's work. They're starting to do it for people who are showing up to their court hearings that they're required to come to. They're doing it in people's homes, and sometimes in a violent fashion. So what you have here is the Trump administration saying, we're going to now bring in the National Guard to help us carry out this mission. And by the way, they're also going to help law enforcement, whether they want the help or not, crack down on crime in some of these cities, all of which are run by Democrats. Again, go after criminals. Despite the legal challenges here, the Trump administration has made clear they are not backing down.
We're purchasing more buildings in Chicago to operate out of. We're going to not back off. In fact, we're doubling down, and we're going to be in more parts of Chicago in response to the people there.
So one of the things I think a lot of us are going to be watching in the week ahead is how this is carried out, if they change their strategy at all, or if the National Guard is going to remain in cities and, frankly, expand into others.
National correspondent Christine Frizzau, thank you. Meanwhile, President Trump secured the first phase of his peace deal between Israel and Hamas, a deal which includes the release of all remaining Israeli hostages held by Hamas. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins, hostage families are celebrating this development, and you spoke to the family member of previously released hostages. What did he have to say?
I did, Steve. So I spoke with Avihai Braddock. His family, his wife, and his 3 kids were taken hostage on October 7th from their kibbutz. All 4 of them survived, and they were released in the first wave of the hostages 51 days after being taken. Now, he said their release was the happiest day of his life, and at the same time, it was also very complicated and hard. He saw his children starved, his kids' hair were filled with lice, and his wife was still dealing with the shock of everything that had happened. Now, 2 more people from his kibbutz are still in Gaza. They're twin brothers. They're 28 years old now. And the current deal will help bring, hopefully, them home, as well as so there's 28 hostages, Steve, that are believed to have been passed away that are part of this deal. And then there's 20 that are expected to still be alive. And these twin brothers from his kibbutz are among that group.
We're just waiting for them. And this is a tremendous joy for our kibbutz. Now everybody's celebrating. Wherever you go in Israel, you see this tremendous unity, and I think that's what's keeping us together, and this is what has led to this deal. And more than that, apart from God, we have President Trump, and he's done so much for us.
Now, Trump has said that the hostages will be released either Monday or Tuesday of this coming week. Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Michael Leiter, though, cautioning there are still obstacles ahead to getting all of these hostages out. First, the deal is with Hamas, and Hamas is not the only terror organization operating in Gaza right now and not the only ones holding hostages. So Leiter said there is about 4 groups that they're dealing with. They're going to have to coordinate with all of those groups to get a hold of all of these hostages, get them out of Gaza and into Israel. Steve.
National correspondents Kayla Gaskins, Christine Frizzau, excellent reporting as always. We appreciate your hard work. Back to you.
New information. For the first time, IVF researchers have successfully grown human embryos with no biological mother. Researchers at Oregon Health and Science University were able to create functional embryos using genetic materials from a person's skin cells, which can then be fertilized and placed into a woman's womb. Experts say the groundbreaking study could transform fertility treatment and expand options for those struggling to conceive, including same-sex couples. The Environmental Protection Agency is facing a lawsuit over the cancellation of a $7 billion solar program. Several organizations filed a suit this week arguing solar funds already awarded by the EPA cannot be revoked. The suit asks a federal judge to reinstate the federal funds for the Solar for All program. The funds were rescinded after the president's Big Beautiful Bill passed. As more states are legalizing marijuana use, new numbers show more drivers are dying from car crashes with THC in their system, the active ingredient in marijuana. The National News Desk, Angelo Brown, is going through this new report.
In a sobering finding that may surprise some, researchers in Ohio analyzed more than 200 cases of drivers killed in crashes over 6 years. And here's what they found. Nearly 42% tested positive for active THC, the chemical in marijuana that gets you high. The study conducted in Ohio, which legalized recreational marijuana in 2023, is getting national attention. The CEO of Mothers Against Drunk Driving warns about the dangers of driving impaired.
What we hear from victims and survivors is just that 1 minute, that one moment, that one decision changed someone else's life forever, changed a family's life forever. We know that 2/3 of all Americans are impacted in some way by an impaired driving crash.
This report comes as the White House weighs whether to reclassify marijuana. President Donald Trump says he's still making up his mind.
Some people like it, some people hate it. Some people hate the whole concept of marijuana because if it does bad for the children, it does bad for people that are older than children. But we're looking at reclassification, and we'll make a determination over the next few weeks.
A separate study published by the NIH in 2024 found similar results. Over 1/3 of fatally injured drivers tested positive for cannabis, and those in states with legal recreational use were significantly more likely to test positive than drivers in states where it's still illegal. In Washington, D.C., I'm Angela Brown.
Coming up, we talk to the American woman who won a Nobel Prize in Medicine for her transformative research on the immune system. And taxpayer money may have funded a top official's luxury vacations. The growing calls for California's insurance commissioner to resign. We'll be right back. This is the National News Desk, America's News Now. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. We are taking the pulse of America, and we start in California, where calls for the state's insurance commissioner to resign are growing.
At a time when insurance rate hikes are spiking across California, an investigation is underway after California Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Lara allegedly used taxpayer money for trips that included staying at five-star resorts like this resort in Alaska, costing $444 per night, or the LA Dodgers World Series celebration tickets.
What does going to five-star hotels, paying thousands of dollars for your entourage and security, have anything to do with insurance when we are not in an insurance crisis? We are in an insurance catastrophe.
We reached out to the California Department of Insurance for comment to see if there were reasons for these trips, but have not heard back.
Baltimore City Police confirming the bleak news, another mass overdose. They say there were 11 victims, with 7 of them taken to the hospital. 4 others refused transport. All of this happening just before noon Wednesday, with residents in the area, some say, not surprised.
When I see things like this, I keep coming and going because ain't no telling when the next one is going to happen. Like it's all day, every day.
This is the same area where dozens of people were taken to hospitals after a mass overdose in July. And despite a drop in overdose-related deaths last year, according to city officials, these recent mass overdoses in Penn North show there's still a serious problem with the issue.
Things are starting to sort of settle down a little bit. And
a whirlwind 48 hours. Her discovery, made in the 1990s, has been a launching point for studying our body's immune system. Brunko and 2 other scientists uncovered the importance of regulatory T cells and the role they play in immune tolerance.
How the body maintains a balance between an immune system that needs to recognize and neutralize things that we shouldn't have in our body, like microbes and viruses, etc., and making sure that that process doesn't get out of control.
Still ahead here on the National News Desk, walking back a major discount, why General Motors' latest announcement could cost you thousands of dollars, plus an aviator's mysterious disappearance, the president's latest order related to Amelia Earhart. We'll be right back in 90 seconds. General Motors is walking back a plan to extend the now expired $7,500 federal EV tax credit. That's after the plan drew criticism from Republican lawmakers. GM customers will still get the $7,500 discount for leases that start by the end of October, but the company will fund that incentive without claiming the tax credit. The Trump administration has ordered the FBI to search for any records on the mysterious death of pilot Amelia Earhart. She was attempting to become, of course, the first woman to fly around around the world when her plane went missing over the Pacific Ocean in 1937. Agents were given until this week to respond to the request. Last month, the president announced he is directing the administration to declassify and release all government records related to Earhart. New dashcam video caught the dramatic moment a medical helicopter crashed onto a busy Northern California highway on Monday. Three crew members are still fighting for their lives. Fire officials say one person was trapped beneath the wreckage before bystanders helped lift part of the helicopter to free them. The Federal Aviation Administration is investigating. And that'll be all for us on the weekend edition of the National News Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Just check your local listings. You can also watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching the weekend edition of the National News Desk. I'm Dee Dee Gatton. And from all of us here, we hope you have a great week.